Martha? Robert? Susan? Dr. Evans? Dr. Ramirez? Margaret. The fluorescent lights of Dr. Evans's overly sanitized office hummed, a low, insistent drone that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. I, Martha Albright, newly 65 and just beginning to taste the bittersweet freedom of retirement, felt the room tilt, the cheerful travel brochures for Tuscany sitting on my kitchen counter. My hands, usually busy with knitting needles or pulling weeds from my small garden, were clamped onto the slick, unforgiving vinyl arms of the chair. "The scan shows a lesion, Martha," Dr. Evans repeated, his voice carefully neutral, his eyes fixed somewhere on the clutter of files on his desk rather than on me. "Here, in the pancreas. It's irregular, and some specific protein markers, CA19-9 for instance, in your blood work are elevated considerably." He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud. "Given the location, the size, and these biomarker levels, we have a strong suspicion of pancreatic adenocarcinoma. Cancer." He finally said the word, letting it drop into the sterile silence like a stone. "Possibly stage 3, maybe even early stage 4, judging by these preliminary findings. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, like the cloying scent of disinfectant. It wasn't a vague suspicion anymore. It was a name, a terrifyingly specific name with a notoriously grim prognosis. My carefully planned retirement, the travel brochures tucked away, the quiet afternoons I envisioned spending with a good book and my cat Mittens, dissolved into a gray, featureless fog. Just weeks ago, I'd been mapping out a trip to Italy, dreaming of Tuscan hills and ancient ruins. Now the only journey ahead seemed dark and terrifyingly short. Arthur, my late husband, had always said I worried too much, that I needed to embrace the present. How ironic that the present had just become a potential death sentence. "We need to admit you immediately," Dr. Evans continued, finally flicking a brief, almost pitying glance my way. "Run more detailed scans, a triple-phase CT, MRI with contrast, possibly a PET scan to check for metastasis, and we absolutely need an endoscopic ultrasound with biopsy to confirm the stage and cell type definitively. Time is of the essence with this type of pathology, Martha." His briskness felt like a dismissal, reducing my entire existence to a set of alarming data points on a screen. I nodded, mute. What else could I do? Argue with the man in the white coat? My throat felt tight, constricted. 65. It felt impossibly young to be facing this. My own mother had lived well into her 80s, sharp as a tack until the very end. I'd always assumed I had her genes, her longevity. Now that assumption felt like a cruel joke. Calling my son Robert felt like wading through molasses. Finding his number, dialing, listening to the rings, each action amplified the dread. He picked up on the 4th ring, his voice sharp with impatience. "Mom? What's up?" "I'm literally walking into a client meeting right now, that eternal meeting, the convenient shield." "Robert," I managed, my voice thin, reedy, barely recognizing it as my own. "Dr. Evans. He wants me admitted to the hospital now." I forced the words out, the diagnosis sticking in my throat like shards of glass. "Pancreatic cancer. He suspects stage 4. There was a stunned silence, a beat of pure static on the line. Then, "Oh, wow. Mom, that's awful." His voice was suddenly lower, hushed, but the shock felt thin, calculated almost. Was I imagining that? Okay, listen. Deep breaths. Susan and we'll be there. As soon as we can, after work probably. Are you holding up okay? Holding up? I felt like I was disintegrating. I'm scared, Robert, I whispered, hating the childish tremor in my voice. Yeah, of course. It's a shock, a huge shock. He sounded flustered now, almost inconvenienced. Listen, Mom, do you have good insurance? Supplementary? We need to make sure all that paperwork is in order. Insurance. That's where his mind went first. Not I love you, not we'll face this together. Insurance. Look, I really have to run into this meeting. It's a big one. But we'll be there later, okay? Just hang in there. We'll figure this out. Figure what out? My treatment? Or the logistics of my demise? The thought was ugly, disloyal, but it surfaced nonetheless. Gotta go. Meeting. Click. He was gone, leaving me clutching a dead receiver, the silence screaming louder than his inadequate words. Susan, my daughter-in-law, texted about an hour later, while I was numbly filling out admission forms that asked irrelevant questions about my childhood illnesses. Her message was a masterpiece of modern detachment, punctuated by crying emojis that felt utterly synthetic. OMG, Martha, terrible news. Can't believe it. Stay strong. We're thinking of you and praying. Let us know room can't come till later, maybe 7 or 8. Big project deadline and kids have activities. We'll bring grapes. XO grapes. As if seedless grapes could somehow compensate for the chasm that had just opened beneath my feet. The hospital admission process was a blur of paperwork, repetitive questions, and the forced cheerfulness of the intake nurse. The room they assigned me was small, beige, overlooking a brick wall. A landscape painting hung crookedly above the bed, depicting a placid lake scene utterly at odds with the turmoil raging inside me. Mittens, my steadfast ginger companion, would have hated the antiseptic smell, the lack of sunny spots for napping. I missed her solid, comforting weight already. Nurses came and went, efficient specters in pastel scrubs. They took my vitals, drew blood with practiced ease, hooked me up to an IV drip that began its slow, rhythmic beeping, the new soundtrack to my life, waiting. That seemed to be the primary activity. Waiting for tests, waiting for doctors, waiting for the end. I tried reading the book I'd brought, but the words wouldn't focus. My mind kept circling back to Dr. Evans's pronouncement, to Robert's call, to Susan's emoji. Robert and Susan finally arrived around 7:30. Looking flustered and carrying a cellophane-wrapped bouquet that smelled faintly of refrigeration. Their faces were masks of strained concern. "Mom, how are you holding up?" Robert asked, perching awkwardly on the edge of the bed, avoiding the slightly stained visitor chair. "Tired," I said, which was true, tired and terrified. "The tests start tomorrow, right?" Susan asked, adjusting the stiff collar of her blouse. She worked in HR and always looked ready for a performance review. "Well, just try to get some rest. Stress isn't good for you right now." She glanced almost imperceptibly at her phone, nestled discreetly in her lap. Did you manage to find that insurance information Dr. Evans mentioned?" There it was again. Insurance. Practicalities. Not, "We love you, Mom, we're here for you." I felt a weary resignation settle over me. "It's in the file cabinet, Robert," I said quietly. "Top drawer. Labeled house." Great," he said, perhaps too brightly. We can grab that when we check on the house tomorrow. Make sure everything's okay." They stayed for less than half an hour, the conversation limping along, punctuated by uncomfortable silences. They asked about the food, jelly and broth, the nurses, efficient, the room, adequate. They avoided the elephant in the room, the diagnosis itself, skirting around it with vague platitudes about staying positive and fighting this thing. It felt like they were following a script, one written for dutiful children visiting an ailing parent, but lacking any genuine warmth or connection. After 20 minutes that felt like 2 hours, they made their excuses. "We should get going, Mom," Robert said, standing up. "Long day tomorrow, but we'll call you first thing, okay?" He patted my shoulder, a gesture devoid of warmth. "Try to sleep well, Martha," Susan echoed, already halfway to the door. I watched them hurry out, leaving behind the scent of expensive cologne and wilting flowers. The silence they left felt heavier, colder. Was this it? Was this the sum total of the family I had poured my life into? A rushed visit, a cheap bouquet, and an unspoken eagerness to get back to their real lives. But the cold seed of doubt, planted earlier, began to send out insidious roots. Sleep was impossible. The rhythmic beeping of the IV pump became a maddening metronome, counting down, what? Hours? Days? Weeks? The distant sounds of the hospital, a trolley rattling, hushed voices at the nurse's station, the occasional moan from another room, only amplified my sense of isolation. I felt adrift in a sea of beige indifference, terrified of the monster lurking within me, and wounded by the careless detachment of those I loved most. Sometime after midnight, deep in the well of hospital quiet, I heard them, footsteps, softer this time, hesitant, and then voices, hushed but distinct, drifting through the slightly ajar door. Robert and Susan. Again. My breath caught. Maybe they couldn't sleep either. Maybe they'd come back to truly be with me. They stopped just outside, close enough that I could hear Susan's sharp inhale. "Okay, so I spoke to Brenda at the bank," Susan whispered, her voice stripped of its earlier brightness, now sharp and businesslike. "She said accessing the joint savings will be easy, but the main investment account, the one Dad set up, is solely in Mom's name. Over $600,000, Rob. We need that power of attorney sorted fast, Rob, especially if, the timeline is short." Timeline. My life reduced to a timeline. "I know, Sue, I know," Robert sighed, his voice a low murmur of weary compliance. It feels so damn ghoulish. She's right there. What if she hears?" She took that sleeping pill the nurse offered. "Remember?" Susan retorted impatiently. "She's out cold. And where else are we supposed to talk about it? Face facts. Pancreatic stage 4. Dr. Evans practically confirmed it. It's aggressive, fast. We have to be practical, Robert. Think about Melissa's college tuition next year, Jason's braces, the balloon payment on the HELOC we took out for the kitchen renovation, Mom's house alone. The realtor did a drive-by estimate today, said Sycamore Street prices are insane. Easily $800K, maybe $9 if we clear it out quickly and stage it right. My house, my sanctuary, staged and sold before my body was even cold. My blood turned to ice. "Did you find her actual will?" Susan pressed, relentless. Yeah, in the cedar chest, behind the old photo albums, just like you remembered," Robert confirmed. "It's basic. Splits everything pretty much down the middle between me and Carol, his sister, with small bequests to the grandkids. But it's ancient, written right after Dad died. It doesn't account for the house appreciation, the current portfolio value. We need to gently suggest she updates it. Maybe frame it as ensuring the grandkids' education is fully covered. She'd probably go for that. You know how she is about them. Good thinking, Susan approved. We need to lock that down. And that grandfather clock in the hall? The one Dad's parents brought over from England. Melissa has always wanted that. We need to make sure Carol doesn't get any ideas about it. You know how sentimental she can be. Jesus, Sue, can we please not carve up her furniture right now? Robert sounded genuinely distressed now, but weak. Let's just get through the tests first. Maybe there's hope. Hope? Susan scoffed softly, the sound like nails on a chalkboard. Robert, it's late-stage pancreatic cancer. Chemo might buy a few months, maybe. Being prepared isn't ghoulish, Robert, it's responsible. Mom would want us to be prepared financially. She wouldn't want us worrying about money while we're grieving her loss. This is about making things easier for everyone involved. Easier for them to count their inheritance while I faced unimaginable suffering. Now Susan's voice dropped again, becoming even more conspiratorial. About the life insurance policy Arthur had, the one from his old employer. It had a spousal payout rider, remember? Payout on her death. Significant amount, I think. Did you find those papers in the household file? I couldn't breathe. I squeezed my eyes shut, feigning sleep with every fiber of my being, while my world imploded silently around me. The betrayal was absolute, visceral, a physical blow that left me winded, grapes and platitudes to my face, hushed calculations about house values and insurance payouts behind my back. My son, the boy I had nursed through fevers and celebrated at graduations, my daughter-in-law, the woman of vultures, circling, impatient, waiting for me to die so they could pick my life clean. My fear vanished, burned away by an anger so cold, so pure, it felt like permafrost forming around my heart. Sharp, painful memories flickered like faulty wiring. Robert, 22, weeping in my kitchen after his first serious breakup. Me holding him, murmuring comfort, canceling a rare weekend getaway I'd planned for myself. Susan admiring my mother's antique diamond brooch. Me spontaneously gifting it to her on her wedding day, wanting her to feel cherished, welcome. Years upon years of free babysitting Melissa and Jason, driving them to activities, hosting holiday dinners, knitting sweaters, baking birth cakes, all the invisible, unpaid labor of love, freely given, assuming a bedrock of mutual affection and respect, an assumption that now lay shattered at my feet. What a blind, sentimental, stupid old woman I had been. The subsequent days were a surreal torment. I submitted to the endless parade of tests, the claustrophobic MRE, the radioactive glow of the PET scan, the invasive biopsy needle. Each procedure felt like a violation, amplified by the knowledge that it was all potentially for nothing, or worse, based on a careless mistake. Between the tests, Robert and Susan maintained their facade of anxious concern. Their visits became longer, their questions more pointed, subtly probing the landscape of my finances, my legal arrangements. "Mom, have you thought about maybe simplifying things?" Robert asked one afternoon, casually straightening a picture on the wall. A picture of him and his sister as children, beaming innocently. You know, managing the house and finances. It can be a lot at your age, especially when you're not feeling well. Maybe we could help you consolidate accounts? "We just want you to focus on getting better, Martha," Susan chimed in, her voice smooth as silk. "Let us take some of the burden off your shoulders. We could help you sort through paperwork. Maybe organize your important documents." They were like wolves circling, patient, waiting for me to weaken. I played my part, the frail, frightened mother, nodding vaguely, murmuring non-committal thanks, watching them through newly opened eyes. Their greed was a palpable thing, radiating off them in waves disguised poorly by filial piety. And the hospital staff? They were polite, professional, but offered little comfort. Dr. Evans remained elusive. Results were pending. Information was dispensed in frustratingly small doses. We need the full picture, Mrs. Albright. The pathology report takes time. Try not to worry. Easy for them to say. The breakthrough, when it came, was anticlimactic, almost accidental. Dr. Ramirez, the young resident with the kind eyes and perpetually furrowed brow, stopped by late one evening, looking profoundly uncomfortable, clutching my chart as if it might bite him. He cleared his throat several times before speaking. Mrs. Albright, he began, then hesitated. I was reviewing your case with the tumor board this afternoon. We finally got the full pathology back from the biopsy. He took a deep breath, finally meeting my eyes. It's benign. Completely benign, Mrs. Albright. Just some chronic inflammation and some fibrotic changes, likely sequelae from a past episode of pancreatitis, perhaps asymptomatic. No cancer cells detected. 0. Benign. The word echoed in the sterile room. Not cancer, not stage 4. Benign. A wave of relief washed over me, so intense it was dizzying, followed immediately by a surge of white-hot fury. But Dr. Evans? I stammered, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. The scans, the markers, he said. Dr. Ramirez winced. Yes? Well. He shuffled his feet, clearly uncomfortable delivering this news. Looking back at the initial CT scan, Mrs. Albright, with the benefit of the negative biopsy and the clear MRI and PET results, the interpretation was questionable. The lesion's characteristics are far more consistent with focal pancreatitis or fibrosis than adenocarcinoma, and the CA19-9 marker, while elevated, can be raised significantly by benign pancreatic or biliary inflammation, or even certain medications you were taking for your arthritis. He swallowed hard. There was, I have to be frank, likely a significant error in judgment regarding the initial assessment and the subsequent conclusion of probable advanced malignancy. An error, not just a cautious interpretation, but a significant error in judgment. 5 days of abject terror, invasive, painful, expensive tests, the horrifying spectacle of my family vultures. Where? I asked again, my voice dangerously low, dangerously calm. Is Dr. Evans? He's, attending an urgent family matter out of state this week, Dr. Ramirez mumbled, flushing slightly. Convenient. But I've discussed this with my attending physician and the chief of oncology. The consensus is clear. You do not have cancer, Mrs. Albright. You are fine. We can process your discharge tomorrow morning. Fine. The word felt like a mockery. I spent the next 12 hours demanding accountability. I insisted on speaking to the chief of staff, perpetually in meetings, the head of pathology reviewing other cases, the chief of oncology, sympathetic but vague. Finally, Mrs. Peters, the gray-haired administrator, reappeared, armed with platitudes and waivers. She spoke of diagnostic challenges, inter-observer variability. She never once admitted fault. She offered a voucher for the hospital cafeteria as a gesture of goodwill. I nearly laughed in her face. We're just so pleased it turned out to be. I walked out of that hospital the next morning under my own steam, the flimsy discharge papers summarizing my non-existent cancer journey clutched in my hand. The sun felt unnaturally bright, the sounds of the city jarring. The cancer was a phantom, but the betrayal? The chilling indifference of the medical machine? Those were real, and the players in my family drama had no idea the script had just been flipped. Robert and Susan, notified of my discharge, arrived to collect me, their faces radiating a carefully rehearsed blend of relief and solemnity. They fussed over my bag, my coat, my comfort, like I was a precious, fragile artifact. "Mom, thank God. We were praying so hard. It's a miracle. We never stopped believing," Robert gushed, helping me into the car with an arm that felt more possessive than supportive. "Oh, Martha, it's just wonderful, wonderful news. We knew you were strong," Susan added from the back seat, producing a lace-trimmed handkerchief to dab theatrically at her dry eyes. I settled back against the headrest, allowing myself a small, weary sigh. Then, as Robert pulled out into traffic, I spoke, letting my voice sound frail, slightly bewildered. "Yes," I murmured, "it was quite unexpected. The doctors were very surprised themselves. Apparently—" I paused, as if struggling to recall the details. "It wasn't cancer, after all, just some peculiar inflammation from an old gallbladder issue, they think. Imagine that. A complete misdiagnosis." The silence that slammed down inside the car was instantaneous, absolute, heavy enough to feel like a physical pressure. I kept my eyes closed, but I could sense the shift, the abrupt halt to their internal calculations, the frantic scrambling behind their frozen smiles. "Misdiagnosis?" Robert finally choked out, his voice cracking on the word. "You mean you're okay?" Susan breathed, the question hanging in the air, pregnant with disbelief and something that sounded terrifyingly like disappointment. "Perfectly healthy, according to that nice young draft Ramirez," I said, opening my eyes just enough to catch Robert's stunned, almost horrified expression in the rearview mirror. I offered him the ghost of a smile. "Isn't that wonderful news? It feels like I've been given a second chance, a whole new lease on life." "Wonderful. Yes. Amazing. Unbelievable. Fantastic," Robert began babbling, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white, his forced enthusiasm bordering on hysteria. Susan slumped back in her seat, staring blankly out the window, the picture of thwarted expectation. The rest of the drive home was conducted in a silence thick with unspoken thoughts, resentments, and the deafening roar of my own quiet, burgeoning plan. They helped me into my small, familiar bungalow, hovering uncertainly in the entryway, the air between us charged. The scent of lemon polish and old books, usually so comforting, now felt like the backdrop to a play I hadn't auditioned for. "Well," I said, deliberately brightly, setting my small overnight bag down on the polished surface of the hall table, right next to Arthur's grandfather clock. "Since I've been given such a wonderful clean bill of health, truly a blessing, I suppose the first thing I should do is get my affairs properly in order. Update that old will Arthur and I made years ago. One never knows when something else might happen, does one? Life is so unpredictable." Their reaction was swift, synchronized, almost comical in its transparency. Matching panic glances, forced brittle smiles stretched across pale faces. "Of course, Mom," Robert said, his voice a little too high-pitched. "Whatever you feel is best. It's always wise to be prepared. We can help you find a good estate lawyer if you like, someone reputable who specializes in planning." "No need, dear," I replied sweetly, waving a dismissive hand as I moved towards the kitchen, needing tea, needing normalcy. I already have someone perfectly capable in mind. In fact, I was thinking, since I clearly have so much time ahead of me now, maybe decades, who knows? I paused at the kitchen door, turning back to face them, allowing a thoughtful expression to cross my face. Perhaps I should leave a significant portion to charity. It feels like the right thing to do, you know, after facing mortality like that, even if it was a false alarm. I tapped my chin. The Pancreatic Cancer Research Fund, maybe? A bit ironic, I suppose, but fitting. Or, my eyes deliberately twinkled, perhaps the local cat haven. Mittens would definitely approve of that. They do such wonderful work with so little. Robert swallowed visibly, his Adam's apple bobbing. Susan's knuckles were white where she gripped the strap of her expensive leather handbag. The air between us crackled with their silent, sputtering outrage. Oh yes, the game was most certainly afoot, and for the first time in my 65 years, I felt an exhilarating, dangerous sense of power. The ensuing months unfolded like a slow, deliberate chess match. I, the seemingly fragile queen, navigated the board with newfound cunning, while Robert and Susan, my grasping rooks, or perhaps ambitious pawns, attempted to maneuver me into checkmate. Their strategy shifted. If I wasn't dying, then I was clearly vulnerable, traumatized, perhaps even mentally unreliable after my hospital ordeal. Therefore, I required their constant, vigilant guidance to manage my affairs and protect me from my own sudden, alarming generosity towards felines and medical research. Their attentiveness became almost comical in its intensity. Weekly Sunday dinners became mandatory, always at my house, always with me cooking, always featuring Susan's slightly too casual inquiries about my energy levels or Robert's helpful suggestions about simplifying my life. Susan, a master of passive aggression, perfected the art of the backhanded compliment, "You spoil us. Though maybe you should let us host next time. Save your strength." Melissa was just saying how much she loves coming here, but college applications are so stressful, and the fees, well, you remember how it was for Robert. Translation: don't spend money on yourself. Save it for our daughter. Robert, meanwhile, appointed himself my unofficial financial watchdog. He'd call midweek, his voice oozing concern. "Just checking in, Mom. Saw an article about online banking fraud targeting seniors. Maybe I should come over this weekend, help you review your account security. Or thinking about property taxes, Mom. They keep going up. Have you considered maybe downsizing? A nice condo, less upkeep? We could help you find something." Translation: let us get our hands on your accounts and assess the equity in your house. They offered endless, insidious help. Susan volunteered repeatedly to help me declutter, a euphemism for assessing the value of my possessions. One Saturday, she spent an hour ostensibly sorting my linen closet, only to emerge asking casually about the provenance of my mother's silver tea service. I thanked her for her diligence and mentioned I was thinking of donating it to the church bazaar. Her barely concealed gasp of horror was immensely satisfying. Robert offered to fix a perfectly functional sticking drawer in my antique writing desk, using the opportunity to inquire about the contents and whether I had properly insured them. I smiled vaguely and spoke about the joys of minimalism. They suggested, with increasing frequency, that I give them spare keys to the house, just in case you fall, Mom, or can't get to the door. We worry. I kept forgetting, or reporting, that the locksmith was terribly booked up. I perfected my role, the slightly daffy, eternally grateful, recovering invalid with newfound, unpredictable whims. I listened patiently to their advice on everything from investment diversification, while mentally moving funds into impenetrable trusts, to the best brands of orthopedic shoes. I accepted the tuna casseroles with polite murmurs. I continued my effusive praise of the Cat Haven, decorating my refrigerator with their fundraising calendar and photos of particularly winsome kittens. I mused aloud about taking up extreme sports. Maybe hang gliding, Margaret? Or rock climbing? Got to live while you're young, right? Purely to witness the apoplectic mixture of fear and fury on Robert's and Susan's faces. They couldn't reconcile the frail woman from the hospital with this energetic, financially reckless, cat-obsessed eccentric. Their frustration simmered, occasionally erupting in arguments between themselves. My dear friend Margaret was my anchor and my sounding board, though I kept the ace up my sleeve, the overheard conversation, entirely to myself for maximum impact later. I did share details of Robert and Susan's sudden, intense interest in my finances and their clumsy attempts at manipulation. Margaret, never one to mince words, was incandescent with rage on my behalf. Vultures, Martha, circling vultures in expensive shoes, she declared fiercely over Earl Grey and lemon drizzle cake one afternoon. Don't you let them bully you or guilt trip you. It's your money, your house, your life to do with as you damn well please. If you want to leave it all to Mittens and her furry friends, you do it and tell Robert if he mentions downsizing one more time, I'll downsize him. Her fiery loyalty was a tonic, strengthening my resolve when the sheer exhaustion of the charade threatened to overwhelm me. But even the most elaborate play must reach its denouement. The constant vigilance, the emotional toll of living a lie, however justified, began to wear thin. I needed closure. I needed to draw the curtain on this toxic performance. The dinner party, initially conceived as a tool of subtle torture, now felt like the necessary stage for the final, unavoidable confrontation. I planned it with the precision of a military campaign. The date was set, a crisp Saturday evening in early autumn. The menu revisited, roast chicken, yes, but also Arthur's favorite scalloped potatoes and my grandmother's apple crumble, invoking layers of family history. The guest list remained firm. Robert, Susan, Melissa, and Jason, the defendants and unwilling witnesses, and my chosen jury, Margaret, sharp-tongued and fiercely loyal, Clara, the retired judge whose presence commanded respect, and Evelyn, gentle but with an unshakable moral compass. The evening arrived, heavy with unspoken tensions beneath a surface of forced cordiality. Robert and Susan presented me with another ostentatious floral arrangement, lilies this time, venereally white, their smiles stretched taut across anxious faces. They complimented everything with breathless enthusiasm, the table setting, the aroma from the kitchen, my simple navy dress. It felt like watching actors nervously awaiting their cue. Melissa and Jason retreated to a corner with their devices, emanating waves of adolescent discomfort. My friends, bless them, formed a warm, protective circle around me, their easy conversation and genuine affection a stark contrast to the strained performance of my son and his wife. Dinner was an exercise in navigating conversational minefields. Robert attempted to lecture us on geopolitical instability. Susan recounted a mind-numbingly dull anecdote about office politics. The grandchildren replied in monosyllables when addressed directly. Margaret, Clara, and Evelyn steered the conversation with practiced skill toward safer harbors. I played the serene hostess, presiding over the table with a calm I hadn't felt in months, the calm of knowing the end was in sight. Finally, the main course was cleared. Coffee was poured. The lemon meringue pie, its golden peaks glistening under the dining room lights, sat expectantly on the sideboard. I let the comfortable hum of post-dinner chatter settle for a moment, then gently tapped my coffee cup with a spoon. The small, clear sound sliced through the room. All conversation ceased. All eyes turned to me. Robert and Susan leaned forward, almost imperatively, a flicker of nervous anticipation in their eyes. Showtime. "I'd like to make a small toast," I announced, my voice perfectly clear, perfectly steady. The months of internal rehearsal had paid off, and share something rather personal with all of you, my dearest family and my oldest, most cherished friends. I paused, making deliberate eye contact with each person around the table, letting my gaze linger for a moment longer on Robert and Susan. A very serious one, as it was presented to me. I saw Robert shift uncomfortably in his seat. Susan's smile became fixed, brittle. "I was diagnosed," I stated, letting the words fall like stones into the sudden pool of silence, quite definitively it seemed at the time, by Dr. Evans at County General Hospital, with advanced pancreatic cancer. Stage 4, possibly even stage 4. Sympathetic murmurs rippled from Margaret, Clara, and Evelyn. Melissa and Jason actually looked up from their phones, their usual teenage apathy momentarily disturbed. It was, as you can perhaps imagine, a profoundly terrifying time. I continued, my voice even, almost conversational, facing one's own mortality so starkly. Well, it certainly clarifies things. Priorities shift rather dramatically. Illusions tend to shatter. It makes you see people and relationships in a completely new, sometimes startlingly harsh, light. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, letting the silence shat, letting them squirm, lying in that sterile hospital bed, hooked up to various beeping monitors, waiting for tests that might confirm my imminent death sentence. I had a great deal of time to think, and as the door to my room was often left slightly ajar, apparently for ventilation, I also had a great deal of time, an ample opportunity to listen. I saw Robert flinch violently, as if struck. He knocked his coffee cup, sending a dark splash across the white damask tablecloth. Susan's hand flew to her throat, her eyes wide with dawning horror. Imagining my profound surprise, I went on, my tone still light, almost wondering, allowing a note of irony to creep in my utter astonishment, when, after 5 days of invasive tests, emotional turmoil, sleepless nights, and frankly consistently substandard communication from senior medical staff, it turned out that the diagnosis was a complete and utter error. I let that sink in, watching their faces, a misread scan apparently, a misinterpreted blood marker, a failure of clinical judgment. The explanations were varied and rather vague, but the definitive outcome confirmed by biopsy and review was clear. I smiled brightly, directly at Robert and Susan. No cancer at all, just a touch of harmless chronic inflammation, likely from an old gallbladder issue I'd forgotten I even had. These things sometimes happen, the hospital administrator assured me with a tight little smile, before offering me a cafeteria voucher. Case closed. My friends gasped audibly. Margaret muttered, "That's criminal negligence, Martha. You should have sued them blind." Clara nodded grimly, her judicial instincts clearly engaged. Robert looked ashen, staring fixedly at the coffee stain spreading on the tablecloth. Susan's composure was visibly crumbling, her face pale and drawn. But the experience, however harrowing and ultimately unnecessary, wasn't entirely wasted, I said, my voice hardening now, my gaze sweeping deliberately, pointedly over my son and daughter-in-law, pinning them in its beam. It was intensely educational. For instance, I leaned forward slightly. I learned just how remarkably prepared my nearest and dearest were for my potential, indeed probable, demise. Now, my voice became flat, factual, each word carefully placed, each detail recounted with chilling precision. Lying there, supposedly sedated but actually wide awake, and listening with morbid fascination, I learned that my modest house on Sycamore Street, the home Arthur and I built together, was worth approximately $800K, maybe $9 if staged right. I learned of the urgent, pressing need to secure power of attorney, to simplify everything and avoid the messy inconvenience of probate. I learned of the strategic importance of gently suggesting I update my ancient will to better provide for the grandchildren's education. A noble goal, of course. I paused, looking directly at Susan, whose face was now crumpled in a mask of disbelief and dawning dread. I even learned, much to my surprise, that my granddaughter Melissa has apparently always adored Arthur's antique grandfather clock, the one his parents brought over from England, and that steps needed to be taken quickly to ensure my sister-in-law, Carol, Robert's own sister, didn't somehow manage to lay claim to it due to her unfortunate sentimentality. I recounted their hushed words, their cold calculations, their pragmatic division of my life's assets, sparing no detail, my voice remaining calm, almost detached, letting the sheer, unvarnished ugliness of their betrayal fill the stunned, horrified silence of the room. When I finally finished, you could have heard a tear drop. The air felt thick, unbreathable, charged with shame and exposure. The grandchildren stared, open-mouthed, tears streaming down Melissa's face as she looked from me to her utterly devastated-looking parents. My friends looked physically ill, their faces registering layers of shock, disgust, and protective fury on my behalf, their gazes fixed like condemning spotlights on Robert and Susan. Robert was trembling visibly now, his face a blotchy, unhealthy purple red. Susan seemed to have shrunk into herself, parchment white, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal seeking escape, finding none. So, I concluded, my voice soft now but carrying the immense weight of finality, of judgment rendered. I realized during my 5-day ordeal in that beige hospital room that the most valuable thing I possess isn't this house that Arthur and I filled with love and laughter, or the stocks he worked so diligently to accumulate, or even his treasured grandfather clock that has marked time in this family for 3 generations. No, I shook my head slowly, deliberately. The most valuable thing I possess, it turns out, is discernment. It's the cold, hard, unwelcome, but ultimately clarifying knowledge of who truly values me, Martha Albright, the living, breathing 65-year-old woman, and who merely values, impatiently and calculatingly, what I might eventually leave behind when I'm conveniently out of the picture. I reached beside my chair where I had placed a thick, official-looking manila envelope earlier. Therefore, I announced, pulling out a multi-page document, formally bound in blue legal paper, I have indeed updated my will, just this week, with excellent, highly recommended legal counsel. I opened the document, scanning the first page as if refreshing my memory. It's quite comprehensive, actually, and notarized. I looked up, directly at Robert and Susan, whose faces were now masks of utter disbelief and dawning, sickening horror. Everything, the house upon my death, The entire investment portfolio currently valued at approximately $632,000. 0 cents. All furnishings and personal effects deemed to have significant monetary value by the executor, including, yes, the grandfather clock, is to be liquidated by the appointed executor, my dear trusted friend Margaret here. The entire net proceeds, I continued, my voice ringing with newfound strength, without exception, will establish the Arthur and Martha Albright Memorial Scholarship Fund at Oakwood Community College. I allowed myself a small, genuine smile. The fund is specifically designed, according to detailed criteria herein, to aid mature students, particularly women over the age of 50 returning to education after facing significant personal or financial adversity, helping people get a real second chance at achieving their dreams. I turned a page. And naturally, a significant permanent endowment to the Sycamore Valley Cat Haven is included in perpetuity, sufficient to cover veterinary care and operational costs for years to come. Mittens and all her furry friends, present and future, will be extremely well cared for. Silence, thick, suffocating, absolute silence. It stretched for what felt like an eternity, broken only by Susan's ragged breathing. Then Margaret, magnificent in her righteous indignation, delivered the final crushing blow. Well, my goodness gracious, Robert, Susan, she said, her voice dripping with glacial contempt, her eyes boring into them with undisguised loathing. What a terrible, terrible shock this must all be for you both, discovering dear Martha is not only perfectly healthy, but also so astonishingly, so publicly generous to returning students and stray cats. You must be utterly devastated? She paused, letting the word hang, twisting it like a knife. I mean, relieved. Utterly relieved, of course. Robert finally exploded. It wasn't dignified anger. It was the sputtering rage of a thwarted child. He shoved his chair back so violently it scraped loudly against the polished hardwood floor, rattling the remaining dessert plates and making everyone jump. How could you? He sputtered, pointing a shaking finger directly at me, his face contorted with a grotesque mask of fury, humiliation, and baffled entitlement. Spying on us, listening at doors, judging us, twisting everything, and then throwing it all in our faces like this, in front of everyone, our children, your own grandchildren. Spying? I raised a delicate eyebrow, feigning mild surprise, though my heart was pounding. I was lying helpless in my hospital bed, Robert, believing I was dying because of a doctor's significant error in judgment. You were the ones conducting detailed financial planning sessions and dividing up my worldly goods in the public hallway directly outside my slightly open door. As for humiliating you, my gaze drifted pointedly around the table, resting on the appalled, disgusted faces of my oldest, dearest friends, then on the tear-streaked, ashamed faces of my grandchildren. I believe you managed that feat quite effectively yourselves, without any assistance from me. I merely provided the factual transcript, the unvarnished truth, something you seem to have difficulty recognizing. Susan dissolved into loud, gulping, theatrical sobs, burying her face in her hands. They weren't tears of remorse, I knew instinctively. They were tears of impotent rage, of frustrated greed, of utter, complete exposure. Jason looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Melissa was openly weeping now, murmuring, "Dad, how could you? How could you?" "I think," I said quietly, but with an unmistakable note of tempered steel beneath the softness, a finality that resonated through the suddenly very quiet, very tense room. It's time for you and your family to leave my house. Now." They stumbled out in utter disarray, unable to meet anyone's gaze, the crushing weight of their public disgrace rendering them speechless. Robert practically dragged a still sobbing, incoherent Susan towards the door. The grandchildren followed, heads bowed, shoulders slumped in shame and misery. The slam of their car doors, followed by the angry squeal of tires as Robert sped away down Sycamore Street into the night, felt like the definitive, utterly necessary and long overdue amputation of a diseased, gangrenous limb from the body of my life. The aftermath was surprisingly peaceful. My friends, bless their loyal hearts, closed ranks around me, offering not awkward pity, but fierce solidarity, quiet understanding, endless cups of strong tea, and surprisingly dark humor. They helped me clear the debris of the disastrous dinner party, their conversation flowing easily now, the elephant not only acknowledged but thoroughly dissected and dismissed, replaced by shared history, righteous indignation on my behalf, and enthusiastic plans for the future. The news, as such dramatic news inevitably does, spread like wildfire through our extended family and the tight-knit fabric of the local community. Robert and Susan became social pariahs overnight, their carefully constructed facade of respectable suburban success shattered, their story whispered behind cupped hands at church socials and grocery store checkout lines as a cautionary tale of breath-picking greed and filial disrespect. Their own marriage, already visibly strained by financial pressures, that HELOC payment perhaps, and differing levels of conscience, or lack thereof, crumbled completely under the weight of the public shame and their private bitter recriminations. I heard, through indirect but reliable channels, that they divorced acrimoniously within the year. Robert moved out of state, seeking work elsewhere. Susan stayed in their oversized house, rattling around with the teenagers, her social circle drastically diminished. I felt no satisfaction, no vindictive pleasure in their downfall, only a profound, weary sadness for the family I had lost, or perhaps, more accurately, the family I finally realized I had never truly had. A year and a half has now passed since that fateful, liberating dinner party. My life has settled into a new, quieter, richer, and infinitely more authentic rhythm. The silence in my house is no longer lonely, it's serene, filled with the ticking of a simple mantel clock, the grandfather clock having been professionally appraised and stored pending my eventual demise and donation, the rustle of turning pages, and the contented purr of mittens. My days are filled with things I choose, things that nourish my soul, not things dictated by the needs or expectations of others. My pottery classes have yielded a collection of slightly lopsided but charmingly unique bowls and mugs, each one a testament to learning something new, however imperfectly. My volunteer work 3 afternoons a week at the Cat Haven fills my life with the meditative act of brushing sleek fur, the mundane satisfaction of scooping litter boxes, and the uncomplicated, non-judgmental affection of dozens of grateful felines. Mittens, of course, remains the undisputed queen of the household, usually found napping in a patch of sunlight on Arthur's worn velvet armchair. The Arthur and Martha Albright Memorial Scholarship Fund awarded its first grants last semester. Receiving heartfelt letters from the recipients, women my age, sometimes older, women juggling jobs and families, women finally getting their chance at a college degree after lifetimes of deferring their own dreams, brings tears to my eyes, tears of profound gratitude and unexpected connection. It feels right. It feels meaningful. Sometimes, usually in the quiet moments just before dawn, when the house is still wrapped in slumber and the sky outside my bedroom window is just beginning to pale from black to indigo, a pang of sadness surfaces. Not for Robert or Susan. Their choices were their own, their consequences earned, but for the lost illusion of family love, the naive, deeply ingrained belief in unconditional loyalty that sustained me through so many years of quiet, unacknowledged sacrifice. But the sadness no longer lingers, no longer cripples me. It's scar tissue now, smooth and pale, a reminder of a deep wound that has, against all odds, healed, leaving behind tougher, wiser skin. I faced a phantom cancer, a terrifying specter conjured by medical error and amplified by institutional indifference. But I survived a very real, very malignant betrayal orchestrated by my own flesh and blood. I lost the son I thought I knew, the family I thought I had carefully built and nurtured over 4 decades. But in the quiet solitude of the wreckage, I found something infinitely more precious, something unexpectedly, stubbornly resilient. Myself. Martha Albright, 66 years old, healthy, independent, financially secure, thanks to Arthur's foresight and my own eventual, quietly pursued legal settlement with County General Hospital for negligent infliction of emotional distress and medically unnecessary invasive procedures. And finally, blessedly, unequivocally free. The silence in my house now isn't empty. It's peaceful. It's the sound of a life reclaimed, rebuilt, and lived entirely on my own terms. And that, I've learned with absolute unshakable certainty, is the only inheritance truly worth cherishing.